हेलो हेलो हेलो, आवाज आ रही है आपको बेटा? हेलो,
अस्सलाम
आ रही
वालेकुम
जी।
सर।
वालेकुम सलाम।
जी सर, आवाज आ रही है।
ठीक है बेटा। आज बेटा हमने हमने क्या करना है, कंज्यूमर डिमांड थ्योरी करनी है, ठीक है। सो फार हमने डिमांड कर्व और ये सब कर लिए, तो टुडे वी आर गोइंग टू स्टार्ट विद द कंज्यूमर डिमांड थ्योरी. Now, consumer demand theory basically can be broken into two parts. One is known as a utility analysis. The other one is known as a indifference curve analysis. Today, I'm strictly going to do the utility analysis. Now, in utility analysis or utility approach, the first thing is that we define what is total and what is marginal utility. Now, total and marginal utility definition क्या होगा? An individual's demand a particular commodity. Why does he demand a particular commodity? So as to get a satisfaction or utility. What is a utility? As I said before also, utility is a power to satisfy a human want. He receives from consuming it. To repeat, an individual demand a particular commodity because of the satisfaction or utility he receives from consuming it. Up to a point, the more unit of a commodity the individual consumes per unit of time. So if he continues to consume more units of per time, the greater is the total utility which he receives from it. The total utility which he will receive from it will be more than the previous one. Now, the basic thing is that the total utility increases. Although we say the total utility increases, the extra, the marginal, in other words, strictly speaking, in economics, we term it as a marginal utility received from consuming each additional unit of a commodity usually increases. To repeat, an individual demands a particular commodity. Why? Because of the satisfaction or utility he receives from consuming it. Up to a point, the more units of a commodity the individual consumes per unit of time, the greater the total utility he receives. His total utility would be more than the previous one. But there is one assumption, there is one condition to it. Though total utility increases, the total utility increases by consuming more unit, but his marginal utility received from consuming each additional unit of the commodity usually decrease. That is from that I'll explain it diagrammatically also. At some level of consumption, the total utility received by the individual from consuming the commodity will reach a maximum. To repeat, I'll go a bit more slow. At some level of consumption, the total utility received by the individual from consuming the commodity will reach a maximum, and the marginal utility will be zero. Where the marginal utility is zero, that point is known as a point of saturation. That point is known as a point of saturation. That is, his total utility will increase, but at a decreasing rate. At some point, his total utility will become zero. The point at which his total utility becomes zero is known as a point of saturation. Clear? Or a saturation point, in other words. Additional unit of a commodity cause total utility to fall and marginal utility to become negative because, now remember one thing, why? Additional units of a commodity cause total utility to fall. Total utility falls and marginal utility to become negative becomes, or it is because of the fact of storage or disposable problem. Now, diagrammatically or graphically, not, I'll say not graphically, but in the schedule form, what we do is on one column, column 1, we take quantity of commodity X. On the other column, we take up total utility of X. For example, quantity consumed is 0, 1, 2 till 7. Total utility which he receives is 0, 10, 18, 24. Now, what is his marginal utility? The marginal utility is the difference between the second and the first unit. Like in the first unit, he was getting total utility of 0. In the second unit, he was getting 10. So 10 minus 0 is equal to 10. So his marginal utility is 10. That is, on first column, we take quantity of X. On second column, we take quantity of X, total utility of X. And in the third column, we take up marginal utility of X. Clear? Thank you, beta. Now, what we do is on first column, we take up the units. As I said before, unit 0, 1, 2, 3 till 7 or any number. Now, by consuming these units, he will receive some total utility. And the total utility would be in increasing form. The total utility is increasing form, but the marginal utility will decrease. The reason is जैसे जैसे आप पानी, फॉर एग्जांपल अक्सर एग्जांपल दिया जाता है पानी ग्लास का, तो अगर एक ग्लास पानी पिएंगे तो उससे आपको सेटिस्फेक्शन ज्यादा मिलेगी, दूसरा सेट ग्लास पिएंगे तो उससे उसका कम मिल जाएगा. कम कैसे मिलेगा? पहले वाले में और दूसरे वाले में जो डिफरेंस आएगा, in other words, the difference of the utility of the second glass of water and the first glass of water will be his marginal utility of X. और आखिर में एक पॉइंट आएगा जहां पे पॉइंट मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी 0 के बराबर हो जाएगा, और वो पॉइंट जो 0 के बराबर हो जाएगा, that point is known as a point of satisfaction, or strictly speaking saturation point, और saturation point और point of satisfaction. अगर वो इससे ज्यादा कंज्यूम करेगा, if he goes on beyond that, he will get negative utility. His utility will start falling. That is, he will receive a negative utility. So in the first column, we take up the quantity of X. In the second column, we take up the total utility of X. In the third column, we take up the marginal utility of X. That you can do it from any good book. Now, what we do is, how, if we draw diagrammatically this schedule, that is quantity of X, total utility of X, total utility of quantity of X. On y-axis, you take up total utility. On x-axis, you take quantity of X's. Now, on that, you take up different points. And when these points are joined together, we get up a total utility of X curve. Now, the curve from where it starts decreasing, जहां से वो curve move करता है downward, that point is known as a point of saturation. Or strictly speaking, or simply speaking, that is known as a point of satisfaction. अभी उस पॉइंट से उसके मिड पॉइंट्स ले लें और एक्स एक्सिस पे मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी ऑफ एक्स ले लें और दूसरे पे क्वांटिटी ऑफ एक्स ले लें, तो अगर इस पे आप मिड पॉइंट्स ड्रॉ कर लें और उससे स्ट्रेट लाइन आएगा तो वो स्ट्रेट लाइन मार्जिन यूटिलिटी ऑफ एक्स होगा। हमने कहा है, क्या कहा था कि जीरो होगा। आफ्टर जीरो इफ ही कंज्यूम फर्दर his margin utility will be decreasing, and a point where from zero onward if he consumes more he will receive a negative utility. So the marginal utility of x and the marginal quantity of x, if drawn on x-axis and y-axis, in other words, marginal utility of x is taken on y-axis and quantity of x is taken on x-axis, from the curve of the total utility, taking the midpoints on quantity of x-axis, joining it together, we get a straight line. The straight line touches x-axis. The point where straight line touches x-axis is known as a point of saturation, or where the total utility or the marginal utility which the consumer receives from consuming a good or a commodity is equal to zero. If he consumes further, we say that he gets the negative utility. उसको utility नहीं मिलता, उसकी utility खराब हो जाती है, तो वो negative x axis में आ जाता है। जहां से x axis से नीचे कर्व आ जाता है तो वो उसका डिसयूटिलिटी काउंट किया जाता है। क्लियर सो फार? नाउ व्हाट अबाउट द कंज्यूमर्स इक्विलिब्रियम? कंज्यूमर कहां पे इक्विलिब्रियम पे होता है? कंज्यूमर वहां पे इक्विलिब्रियम पे होता है जहां पे मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी ऑफ एक्स over price of x is equal to the marginal utility of y over the price of y equals further. There the consumer is in equilibrium, or strictly speaking you can say the objective. What is the basic objective of a rational consumer? Why the rational consumer consumes? The objective of the rational consumer is to maximize the total utility, as I said before. His objective is to maximize total utility or total satisfaction. He derives from spending his income. The consumer reaches this objective. Which objective? The consumer's equilibrium objective. The objective or is said to be in equilibrium, as I said, to be in equilibrium when he spends his income. जब वो अपना पैसा इस तरीके से खर्च करता है कि उसकी यूटिलिटी और या उसकी सेटिस्फैक्शन ऑफ द लास्ट रुपी स्पेंट, the utility which he receives from the last rupee spent is on the various commodity is equal or is same, is equal or same. हम इसको मैथमेटिकली एक्सप्रेस करते हैं, जो मैंने आपको शुरू में कहा है, दैट इज मार्जिन यूटिलिटी ऑफ एक्स ओवर प्राइस ऑफ एक्स इज इक्वल टू मार्जिन यूटिलिटी ऑफ वाई ओवर प्राइस ऑफ वाई। अगर आप इसको डायग्रामेटिकली प्रेजेंट कर दें तो आपके पास कंज्यूमर इक्विलिब्रियम आ जाता है। और कंज्यूमर इक्विलिब्रियम कहां पे रिसीव होता है? जहां पे प्राइस ऑफ एक्स टाइम्स क्वांटिटी ऑफ एक्स प्लस प्राइस ऑफ वाई times quantity of y and so on is equal to m. What is m? Capital M. That is his money income. So where the consumer's in price of x times quantity of x plus price of y times quantity of y and so on till z or onwards, which is equal to m, the amount of money which he spends on consuming the different quantities is equal. There we say the consumer is in equilibrium. Clear? Now, sometimes consumers are interested in exchanging. They try to exchange goods from one another. and the exchange takes place so long as it is advantageous for each consumer. That is known as a exchange. जहां पे एक्सचेंज वो करता है और जहां तक एक्सचेंज से उसको फायदा मिलता है तो वहां तक वो एक्सचेंज करता है आपस में. अगर एक्सचेंज से उसको फायदा ना मिले, if it is not advantageous to him, then he does not exchange or he stops exchange. Now, it can be written as, it may be possible. It may be possible. I said it is not possible. It may be possible for a consumer who is in equilibrium, जो equilibrium में है, to increase further his total utility. What is the basic objective of the rational consumer? To maximize utility. So he may be interested in increasing his total utility. और total utility कैसे वो increase करेगा? By exchanging commodities with another individual, he will increase his total utility by exchanging the commodities with other individual who is also in equilibrium, but there is a condition, but facing different prices. To repeat, it may be possible for a consumer who is in equilibrium to increase further his total utility by exchanging commodities with another individual who is also in equilibrium but facing different prices. For two individuals, assuming there are only two individuals, the real world is consisting of two individuals. For two individuals to engage in voluntary exchange, voluntary exchange ये होगा कि वो देखेगा कि मुझे फायदा हो रहा है या नहीं हो रहा. That's why we say voluntary exchange. Both must gain. दोनों को फायदा होना चाहिए. By the voluntary exchange, both the commodities should gain, should have some profit, some gain. उसको कुछ ज्यादा मिलना चाहिए. Right? If one gains nothing, अगर आप कहेंगे, कोई पूछेगा, let's say if one gains nothing, then why exchange should take place? Because exchange is done only for a reason, to maximize total utility. So if one gains nothing or loses from exchange, he will refuse to trade. वो आपस में ट्रेड नहीं करेगा, वो आपस में एक्सचेंज कभी भी नहीं करेगा. क्लियर? इफ द
Excuse me, sir.
टू जी हेलो.
सर प्लीज अगर रियल लाइफ में से एक एग्जांपल दे दे.
अच्छा, रियल लाइफ में फॉर एग्जांपल आप में से कोई दो इंडिविजुअल्स हैं, आप एक्स ले लें, वाई ले लें. तो एक्स इंडिविजुअल या आप हैं और मैं हूं, तो मैं आपस में और आप आपस में एक कमोडिटी को आपस में एक्सचेंज करेंगे. एक्सचेंज तब तक हम करेंगे जब तक मुझे फायदा होगा और आपको भी फायदा होगा. अगर आपको और मुझको फायदा नहीं है या सिर्फ मुझको फायदा है और आपको नहीं है, तो आप कहेंगे कि मैं एक्सचेंज क्यों करूं, क्योंकि आपको तो फायदा नहीं मिल रहा, आपका टोटल यूटिलिटी इंक्रीज नहीं हो रहा. तो इसीलिए वॉलेंट्री एक्सचेंज हम कहते हैं जब तक के दो इंडिविजुअल्स में जब तक सीम होती है या एक्सचेंज होती है, बेटा उर्दू मेरी खराब है, जब एक्सचेंज होती है तो उस तक वो एक्सचेंज करते रहेंगे जब तक उसको फायदा मिलेगा. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर आपको एजुकेशन के हायर एजुकेशन से फायदा नहीं है तो आप हायर एजुकेशन क्यों करें? हायर एजुकेशन आप इसीलिए करते हैं और फीस इसीलिए आप मुझे देते हैं या मुझे तनख्वाह इसीलिए मिलती है कि मैं आपको पढ़ाता हूं और आपकी यूटिलिटी ज्यादा करता हूं. और आपकी यूटिलिटी कैसे ज्यादा होती है? आपको अच्छा जॉब मिल जाता है, आपकी इंक्रीज हो जाती है तनख्वाह, आपकी पेमेंट में इंक्रीज हो जाती है या आपकी समझ में ज्यादा आ जाता है. तो इसीलिए हम कहते हैं कि एक्सचेंज टेक्स प्लेस so as to increase the total utility. What is the total utility? जो मैंने शुरू में आपसे कहा है, Total utility is the utility which a person receives from consuming a particular commodity. अगर आपको उससे सेटिस्फैक्शन नहीं मिलता, सपोज आपको प्यास नहीं है, पानी आप नहीं पीना चाहते और मैं आपको पानी जोर से पिलाता हूं, तो आप कहेंगे कि मेरी टोटल यूटिलिटी पे कोई फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता क्योंकि मुझे पानी की जरूरत ही नहीं है। और पानी की अगर जरूरत है तो मैं पीऊंगी, तो जब पिएंगे आप तो आपकी यूटिलिटी ज्यादा होगी, लेकिन एट ए डिक्रीजिंग रेट। पहले ग्लास से जो आपको यूटिलिटी मिलेगा वो दूसरी ग्लास से आपको इतनी यूटिलिटी नहीं मिलेगा, क्योंकि आपका थोड़ा बहुत थर्स्ट, आपका थोड़ा बहुत वो चाहत जो है पानी का वो कम हो जाएगा। तो आपका दूसरे यूनिट में और पहले यूनिट में जो डिफरेंस आएगा तो वो आपका टोटल यूटिलिटी के बराबर होना चाहिए। वो एट अ डिक्रीजिंग रेट होगा और उस पॉइंट तक आएगा जबकि पॉइंट 0 हो जाएगा। क्लियर बेटा? In a two-dimensional diagram or two individual case, we say individual A and B. And suppose the world consists of only two commodities, X and Y. There is a basis for mutually advantageous exchange. ये देखिए, ये आपका क्वेश्चन आंसर हो रहा है, आप इसको केयरफुली सुने। इन अ टू इंडिविजुअल, हमने कहा है दो इंडिविजुअल ए और बी और टू कमोडिटीज एक्स एंड वाई। ये हमारी दुनिया में दो ही कमोडिटीज हैं, दो ही इंडिविजुअल्स हैं। तो वहां पे ट्रेड होगा उस तक जब तक आपका मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी ऑफ एक्स ओवर मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी ऑफ वाई फॉर इंडिविजुअल ए, marginal utility of x, that is of individual x, divided by the marginal utility of individual y for individual A differs from marginal utility of x over marginal utility of y for individual B. Clear? As the quantities exchanged increases, अभी हम क्वांटिटी को इंक्रीज कर रहे हैं, हम उसके एक्सचेंज इंक्रीज कर रहे हैं, द टू रेशियोज अप्रोच ईच अदर, और वो तब तक अप्रोच करते हैं आपस में, अप्रोच होता जाता है जबकि वो दोनों बराबर हो जाते हैं। When they are identical, in other words, strictly speaking in economics we say when they are identical, so there the exchange will stop. Where the value becomes identical, or in other words, we say the exchange will take place unless and until the values differ, where they are not identical. When it is identical, it means neither A would benefit, neither B is going to benefit from it. When nobody is going to benefit, there the exchange will stop. Clear? Now, from this consumer utility analysis, we can derive individual demand curve. Now, individual demand curve, what is a demand curve? Demand curve, strictly speaking, is a diagrammatic representation of a demand schedule. What is a demand schedule? Demand schedules show us the relationship between the prices and the quantities. When the price and the quantity relationship is shown diagrammatically, it will give us a curve, and the curve will be a downward sloping curve, but it is never going to touch x-axis. Now, you may be asking that sometime in the books or sometime we see it is a straight line. The demand curve is a straight line only under certain assumptions. It is not always a straight line. If it is a straight line, there are certain assumptions which should be taken into consideration. Otherwise, it is a downward sloping curve reaching x-axis but never touches x-axis. Now, through the utility analysis, we can draw the demand curve. Now, for drawing a demand curve, what we do is we take up on X on one side quantity, on the other side we take up margin utility of X, on the other side we take up the margin utility of Y. On y-axis, you take up prices of X. On x-axis, you take up quantity of X's. Now, when you plot margin utility of X and margin utility of Y, you get a two points or more than 2 points. And when those 2 points or more than 2 points are drawn or joined by a straight line or by a curve, it gives us a demand curve. Clear so far? This is how we draw a demand curve through the indifference curve analysis. Now, in utility analysis, two things are very important. Why? Those two things which are important are the substitution effect and the income effect. What is a substitution effect? Substitution effect means that when you substitute one commodity for another. What is the income effect? Income effect is an effect which is given to us due to the increase or decrease of the income. How do we explain it? The movement from one point of consumer equilibrium, the movement from one point of consumer equilibrium to another can be broken into two things. One is known as a substitution effect, as I said before. The other is known as an income effect. Now, substitution effect says, what is a substitution effect? As I said before, substitution effect says that when the price of a commodity falls, remember, when the price of a commodity falls, the individual substitutes this commodity for other. Now, what is other commodities? But prices of the other commodities are going to remain the same. That is, the ceteris paribus condition should take place. This substitution effect operates to increase the quantity demanded of a commodity whose price has fallen. Now, on the other side, the income effect can be explained as follows. If the price of a commodity falls, as I said before, if the price of a commodity falls, ceteris paribus, again, everywhere in economics, we make an assumption of ceteris paribus, other things remaining the same. The whole economic theory is based on ceteris paribus condition. The purchasing power of the individual's constant money income increases. What does this mean? In other words, his real income increases. Now, when his real income increases, what happens? He is going to substitute one commodity for another, or he is going to give up the inferior good and buy the superior good, or any other good. So it is a sort of a thing that his income has increased. This means when this occurs, his real, as I said, his real income increases. Now, when his real income increases, the individual tends to buy more of a commodity whose price has fallen. The individual is going to buy more of the commodity whose price has fallen. If commodity is a normal good, less of it will he will buy than the inferior good. So this is what an substitution and income effect is. Now, if there is any question, please do ask. Otherwise, this is enough for today. My next lecture will be based on the indifference curve analysis.
एक्सक्यूज मी सर सर मैक्रो में फिर आप अगला क्या पढ़ाएंगे?
मैक्रो में अगला मैं आपको 3 सेक्टर इकोनॉमी पढ़ा दिया है, तो 4 सेक्टर पढ़ाऊंगा. 4th सेक्टर में मैंने आपसे कहा था कि मैं इंटरनेशनल सेक्टर कंसिडर करूंगा.
ठीक है सर.
ठीक है बेटा, इंटरनेशनल सेक्टर पढ़ाऊंगा, तो वो 4 सेक्टर इकोनॉमी हो जाएगा. और माइक्रो में मैंने इंडिफरेंस कर्व एनालिसिस पढ़ाना है. अभी आप यू कैन स्टडी इट फ्रॉम एनी गुड बुक, any good book. This is very basics, very basic. Any good book of economics, अगर आप इवन हामिद शाहिद की बुक ले लें तो उसमें भी आपको यूटिलिटी एनालिसिस और इंडिफरेंस कर्व एनालिसिस मिलेगा. तो इससे ना घबराएं, इसको आसान लफ्जों में पढ़ें और इसमें मैथमेटिकल इक्वेशंस जहां पे हैं वो करें, जहां पे ग्राफ्स हैं वो बनाएं, जहां पे शेड्यूल्स हैं वो बनाएं. ठीक है बेटा?
ठीक है
थैंक
सर,
यू वेरी मच
इंशाल्लाह.
फॉर टुडे.
थैंक यू सर. अल्लाह हाफिज.
अल्लाह हाफिज बेटा.